Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics, back with the On Wander Lane wall hanging supplemental videos we promised you. Hopefully you are in our club, and if you're not, jump into the fun. 12 months, all of the wall hangings are the same size, a beautiful felt craft hanger to display your project. I love that idea, maybe an entryway. I have this certain table where most of my quilts are just too big to be over this table. How nice to have that in the entryway. You can do the different decor, maybe on the table underneath the quilt to complement a beautiful design. Nancy Halverson, Art to Heart, she is the creative genius behind these projects. And thank you, as always, to Nancy for allowing us to even do the supplemental videos, but be able to pre-fuse and laser cut that applique. And if you're in that club, that's probably one of the reasons you're in that club. You don't have to trace or cut out those applique shapes. Those come to you already down. You can skip that part of tracing and cutting out and just enjoy the fun of being able to assemble the applique. And when we kicked off our supplemental videos, which we did last month for the February, we took that deep dive into using the wafer light box, the Applifuse mat, and the really great layout diagram inside the book that comes to you each month. So if that's foreign to you, be sure to check out last month's tutorial where I take you through that process of how to pre-assemble all of the applique shapes using the combination of the light box, the Applifuse mat, layout diagram. So we're bringing them onto the background as assembled units instead of one by one like we did back in the day, right? Once you have your center applique done, and similar to last month, we did a little bit of strip piecing to kind of make our garden area right here. Attach that. That goes off to the side, and we're going to take a look at those patchwork blocks. There's 3 different ones. We've got this one here, a little bit of fussy cutting out, kind of a square and a square. And then we have a disappearing, I think it's called a 4-patch. So let's just jump right into that. And again, if you have not joined our club, if you join now, we're going to send you not only last month's kit, but this month's kit, so you're on the same schedule as everybody else. Limited space, so if you're like, I don't want to miss this, you're right. Get your spot, get your thread set, and any other notions you might need, and I'll be showing you those notions as we progress each month through our wall hanging series. So let's talk about our disappearing 4-patch. We have, of course, our fabrics will be cut precisely to the requirements as noted in each month's pattern book. And so we have those, and we'll be sewing them right side together. I love using my seam guide on my machine to hold me true to that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we'll be just sewing that 1/4 inch seam until we have our 2 pieces. And we just happen to press to the green, and I'm going to get my iron. Oh, it is already heated up. Good. We're going to be doing sewing, cutting. We're going to be doing a lot of patchwork today. So I definitely have my patchwork pins handy and all those things that help me be successful. And I'm trying to get really accurate piecing accomplished. So now that we have this sewn together, the next thing that we do is easy peasy. We're simply going to turn that and just cut that in half, right? So if we kind of take a look at that, that measures 8 inches. You're just going to measure 4 inches over and cut in half until you have 2 pieces, just like that. Then for our next step, I'm going to show you this. We would just opposite sides, pin. See how we have interlocking seams here? This is where we want to begin to be very intentional about how we pin our project together. We don't just want to pin left to right. We want to find where is that place, of course, right there, that we want to lock in, and you'll put a pin there first. Right there. And I'm pinning from this side, not out here. Why is that? This is actually something Tammy taught me years and years ago, because I always used to pin on the outside. And as you could expect, as I was sewing, I would have to stop and remove the pin, stop and remove the pin. This allows me to keep the pin in the whole time, and I just make sure that I'm more than a 1/4 inch away from my seam allowance, so I'm never sewing over a pin. I never want to do that. I've done that inadvertently once, and that was an absolute mess. It was a little scary even. Ended up breaking a needle, and parts were going down inside the machine, and it was a bad scene, and that was by mistake, and I've learned just never do that. Make sure you're checking and keeping your pins out of the 1/4 inch seam allowance so that it can't even happen if you even do miss that a pin is there. So obviously you're going to sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this is what we're looking like on the back. Let me show you this actually. This cool little spin. I've got this heating up. I'm going to show you this so I can show you how to do that spin. It's kind of a bonus. It's almost like a Tammy signature. She did the video prep for me today, and I'll show you how she does this. It's a really cool thing. So what is this about? How do we have this cute little almost 4 patch in the middle? How's that happening? When we look at this, you could absolutely press the seam open if you are more comfortable with that. You could press that to one side or the other, or watch what I'm doing. When I push this, and all of the seams track in the same direction, this way, this way, this way, and this way, that's what creates that cute little 4 patch right in the center. Is there a benefit to doing it one way or the other? I don't know. If this is more beneficial than pressing the seam open, looks pretty cute. We got that benefit going for us. But other than that, is there a benefit? I'm not sure. But I wanted to be sure to show you how she did that. Okay, now notice how this piece is marked. This is per the instructions inside the pattern. And this Creative Grid ruler is our go-to for this. This is a 1.5 inch by 12.5 inch Creative Grid ruler, and I'm going to grab for my friction pen. They're wanting us to mark 1.25 inches away from our seam, and really any ruler would work, but how nice to have a mission-specific ruler, because we know with Creative Grids and this dash line right here that if we place this 1.5 inch wide ruler with the 1/4 inch on the sewn line, that automatically puts us 1.25 inches to the right of that seam. And then we're going to draw that line, and I'm going to just have to move a few things, and then we rotate, and you continue marking, right? Mark, rotate, mark, rotate, mark. All right, with the last mark, let's start cutting. A spinning mat. Let's talk about things. We know that when you invest in tools that help you be successful, you're going to have better quilt blocks. I am the first to admit I didn't used to buy quality pins. I didn't change my blade when I should have. I didn't change my needle. I don't know why I dragged my feet for so long to get a spinning mat, because I would make a cut and then I'd have to pick up the pieces and turn them and cut again. Watch how I'm not going to pick up my fabric. I'm going to turn around my fabric. I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff online, and you guys might have too, of people cutting back toward themselves, under their arm, switching hands with the rotary cutter. I'm not that ambidextrous to be doing that. There's no reason to do that. This Creative Grid spinning mat, quite new on the market, is 14 inches wide. If you're working with 12.5 inch blocks consistently, a very typical measurement for a quilt block, get this spinning mat. If you're going to be doing any kind of squaring up or trimming all around, just get this. And I love, notice it's not sliding across my table. I can't even make this thing slide when I'm trying to move it right now. There's a grip underneath this. It makes cutting safer. So if this is in your budget or maybe on your wish list for your birthday, Mother's Day, or maybe Christmas, get one of these and you're going to be so happy you have it. So we're going to give a cut, and I am not lifting this fabric. Okay, so let's bring out our quilt block. It's going to be a little easier for you to follow along. This is what we're going for right here, right there. So you can see the center. The center doesn't, oh, I'm wondering if I got a little bit of a nick in that blade. I do, I must. All right. Well, I'll spare you watching me change the blade on this. One of the things I love though, while we're talking about this, in the old days when rotary cutters first came out, there was a screw, a spring, and you had to be very careful about that. Watch how quick this is to take that blade out. These quick change rotary cutters now are incredible. Way safer and more intuitive to change the blade. All right, less is what we're going for. This stays here. This is out in the corner. And we're just going to build the sight picture that we see. So this is that disappearing for a patch. And now we're here. That's how we're doing that. And as you can imagine, we're going to be sewing the top row, the middle row, and the bottom row. This, not challenging, right? You have no seams happening the way you do here. That's a no-brainer. Quarter inch, and I'm going to show you how we press this. I want you to see that. So let's look at that one more time. We'll get a good look at that so you can see how we did that. But let's talk about this here, right? That is, again, look at that. We have a beautiful interlocking seam, pin, so I'm just showing you, this is the part right here, and on the center portion, we're pressing away. Warm up that seam here. And same here, as you can imagine, interlocking seam, right? Put in that pin. We've already said so the quarter-inch seam allowance. Seams are pressing to the outside, which means here in the middle, seams are pressing to the middle so that we have interlocking seams right there when we sew that row together. And of course, we're pinning those points first, pinning in the corner, sew the block together. That's how the disappearing four patch goes together. Pretty straightforward, right? Looks more complicated than it actually is. All right, let's move on to our next block here. I love the motifs in Nancy's fabric collection here, where we get to be able to kind of fussy cut out certain parts of the fabric. So I've got a little note here. Ultimately, we're going to trim this to 6.5. But how did we get here? So let's put that aside. That's where we're headed. But how are we going to get there? So let's bring out our elements for this block. And that starts off with, again, really fussy cutting that center. This is a 3.5 inch. I love being able to just find that sweet spot on the fabric. Here we go again with cutting around a shape where you're making the first cut, rotating the mat, making the first cut versus lifting up the fabric. Another reason to be using that spinning mat. Let me turn that around here. So we have this fabric, and then we started off with some squares that we simply cut on the diagonal. That's how we ended up with 4 squares. Now we need to sew these And as you would expect, you always have some extending. What I find is where some people tend to go wrong with what's really a square and a square is that they just kind of go for that. And what I recommend so that this ends up being more accurate is we know we want this to be as centered on here as possible. How are we going to do that? I'm going to fold this in half to create and just finger press this. Just finger press it. And I'm going to also take my fussy cut fabric and I'm going to finger press this. Don't take it to the iron. Don't take it to the iron. This is just for an assembly component. I don't want to put a hard crease in this. What this does for me is notice this fold and that fold just nest into each other like a valley. You can see they're lining up right there. That's the spot. That is your spot. I'm going to actually flip it over so I can see where I'm sewing from. Let's go sew that together. Now you have bias. Anytime you are cutting on a diagonal, you have bias. A great reason before you even cut out these pieces to add sizing to that fabric and get it good and pressed out. Sizing helps stabilize bias. As you can see on this edge, no stretch. No stretch. Look at this side. Whoa. Careful. Very careful. You just have to handle bias differently, and it can help by adding sizing to the fabric before you make your very first cut of even cutting out the square. Okay, so just wanted to mention that. I should have mentioned that before. Same thing on the opposite side. Be sure to work in opposites. I can still see that crease finger pressed in. I'm going to crease the other one. Right, knowing I'm going to be in here. I'm going to press that again. Get that inside that valley. The creases line up. Hopefully you can see that from above. You get the idea. Flip it over, sew it on. And again, we will press to the outside. Now, what about this side? How are we doing that? Same. I can see from the back side, you're just folding it in half, just like you've been doing. This gets pressed in half. So we know where to position that. Nest those together, 1/4 inch, do the same thing with the other one until you have this. All right. That's where we are. So let's put that aside. Now, this is a very challenging part of this, and because of the size that we need to square this up to. So that's going to be 4 3/4. You're like, I don't have a 4 3/4 inch ruler. Neither do I. Nobody does. How are we going to do this? We want to square that up because as you can see here, notice how when that piece, this next piece is added on, right here, it's going to ultimately kind of live there. So you can see we have to trim some distance away, right? How are we going to do that? So when we first lay out our ruler, I want you to look at this Creative Grid ruler. The black circles are 1/2 inch increments. This is the engineering behind Creative Grid. The colors aren't just style points. They mean something. Notice all the black circles have always a 1/2 inch increment with them. 5 1/2, 4 1/2, 1 1/2, and that the white circles have whole numbers. All right, so let's look at this. If we have this here, and we notice that, and we're going to need to trim that here. We're going to trim it this way. We know that we need to trim 1/4 of an inch from these points, right? Now look at something. Notice the 4.5 is sitting right here. 4.5 is 4 2/4. We need to trim 1/4 extra beyond that. Just keeping this idea in our minds right now, knowing that that's 4.5, notice what this is basically indicating. If that is 4.5 and it's touching that white corner, that's a good sign, because we know that over there, 1 more 1/4 inch is our cut line, 4 3/4. Notice we have 2 sides exposed right now. I have this top line that's going right across the top and right here. So spinning mat is clutch on this. This is the MVP of this project. For sure is the spinning mat. I do not want to lift this up in the midst of trimming this. So I'm going to trim, and I know that when I rotate this, and remember this, we know those 2 edges are cleaned, right? So if we decide, all right, we now know those are good to go. That's my 4.5. That's my 4.5. I know that edge right there is 4 3/4. It has to be. So is this one down here, 4 3/4. Notice that's exposing these 2 sides for us to trim. Beautiful. So let's trim, and then let's trim. Okay, this is where we are now. Just like we did, we had our squares. We should have put sizing in that fabric, pressed it out nice and flat, made our cut them on the diagonal. Remember, no stretch, lots of stretch. Be careful, we talked about that. Same thing that we did before. How are we putting this on? Folding that in half, finding the place, right? Folding this, knowing this is gonna go there, folding this in half, same thing. Not different, It's just the same drill. We're just now working with a piece that has a center and now some green fabric around it, right? But the process is the same. Put it in position, pin, 1/4 inch, press the outside. Work in opposites until you have this right here. So let's look at that one, and we have a note. We're going to trim that up to 6.5, and how lovely that Creative Grid has made a 6.5. Far easier, right? It's always easy trimming around the entire perimeter of a ruler. And we have these beautiful lines all the way around to help us know where we should be. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. That just makes me happy. Notice I will not pick up this quilt block. Instead, we will rotate around it and trim around it. And there we have it. There is our beautiful quilt block. Easy peasy, right? Awesome. We're moving right along. Let's see what we have next. So our final block is our Shamrock block, of course. It is Shamrock Ridge. You have to have that block. And there are some specifics with pressing here that I want to point out to you. These are things that are not in the book, so this might be a thing you want to look at. I'm going to flip this over. Remember how interlocking seams is what we want to achieve every time, because that lock, that engagement of those seams helps us get the points that we're looking for. We know what we want, we just don't know how to always achieve it. anytime a seam can lock, we've increased our chances. So let's flip that over one more time. Actually, I'm going to show you something. When we lay out our fabric, let's just lay out these squares, this, 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 and this, and there's no mystery. We can sew them together into a 4-patch. Let me just show you that. That's all we did. We just sewed them together, kind of spun the center, just like we've done before. Notice how we have a fabric here that we're adding to the corner, sewing on the line and flipping, and that's what's giving us that line, right? And we do the same thing over here, and we get that one. And we do the same thing down here, actually over on this one, to what we call snowball the corner. That doesn't seem to be difficult. We've done this before. Two things I want to point out to you that are not intuitive, and they've gotten me many times, is notice how all of our stripes are moving in the same direction. If that's you and you also want the stripes moving in the same direction, just be really intentional about the way this is laid out. Notice how at first glance this looks like this is going to work. Watch what happens though when we pretend that we've sewn this is now going up and down, but this one, when I sew it, is going left and right. See how being very intentional, and it's not intuitive. You would think that when you lay something on here that's up and down, sewn in, it would be up and down. Look what just happened. The stripes are running left and right. Not intuitive, right? So you're like, oh, Jen told me about this. Erase the line, draw again, corner to corner, and you will see when you lay it down and you kind of pretend, you're like, oh, yes, that's the orientation I want. Okay, don't move. Grab your marking tool, draw that corner to corner, and sew it on. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to bring to your attention. You've got directional fabric and just deciding, do you want your stripes running this way, up and down, or maybe you don't care at all and then mixing and matching is fitting your personality. Awesome, however that is. The other thing that I want to mention here is having interlocking seams is a wonderful thing. Why is that? Why am I bringing that up right now? Because if I press this to the outside, and for the next one, I press this one to the outside, and these all go pressed to the outside, I end up with a big confluence of fabric right in here. Look what we've done instead. For this group, we press to the white. For this group, in order to have interlocking seams here, we press toward the green. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Put that to the side. We've already sewn on just as you would. Now, if I press to the outside on all of these, I'm going to show you what I'm going to prove what I'm talking about here. And of course, we would be trimming this away, and we can go do all that. Because you're still going to trim. No matter how you press, you're still trimming. That step isn't going anywhere. And you can see I still didn't change that blade. I guess I'll do that at the end of this video. Okay. I will have a fresh blade before we meet again. How about that? Okay. If I were to leave those pressed out there, and I have my quilt block, which I already do, have that one done. Let's pretend that I press them out that way. Look what happens. I have no interlocking seams. Look at the bulk that's happening in that. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have all of that happening, and that is not good. For that reason, what we are going to do is press these seams back toward the green. Simply flip the block over so you're on the back side and press. Easy. no problem. This is going to pay dividends to you in a way that no other function really of quilting can do. The interlocking seam, as I look back at my earliest quilts, was almost always the culprit. One, I was not being as accurate with my cutting. Two, I was definitely not accurate with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And three, pressing was willy-nilly. I had no plan, right? I was like, okay. And I really didn't understand the value of these things locking in. Now let's look at what we've done. Now when we place these right side together, look at that lock right there. We are putting a pin right there, and let's go sew that. And let's see how we did. Look how those points come together perfectly. Why? Interlocking seams. Being intentional about that. So let's look at that. You can see we have bulk on both sides. That's a time when you want to evenly distribute the bulk and press a seam open. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Just let that do its work for a little bit longer here. Love that. We have this portion of our block. So now we have, I thought it was kind of fun. I know Tammy did hers moving in the same direction. I felt like these were leaves moving in different directions. So when I did this one, I was like, let's mix up those. I do like my stripes running in the same direction, however. So we have this piece here, and now we have our stem. Easy peasy again. So we start off with our fabric. We're going to sew on that line, which gave us, that was us here, and we trimmed that away. And then again, we're going to sew on that line. And let's go do that actually. We'll just take that pin. And we'll press to the outside. Lift that up. Let me get a little bit of a longer ruler here. Maybe I'll use my corner clipper for this one. Great tool, wonderful tool. I love making my binding strips with that. It's perfect, just every single time, incredible. So that's how we're getting here. Of course, right side together. We're this far, let's just do it. Let's just sew this together. And again, we're going to distribute that bulk. Now we have this portion. What have we always said? What do we care about the most? Points. We will place these two together and decide what is the most important place. Absolutely that seam right there. We really want that. So that's where we're going to focus first. We'll place a pin on this side, staying outside of our 1/4 inch seam. There's another spot right there. Love that interlocking seam. And then again down here. Looks like actually just pinning those corners. Great. Let's go put in one more seam. We deserve to see what our beautiful quilt block looks like. Let's go do that. Okay, let's see how we did. Notice I always have my seam ripper's probably nearby. Guys, don't worry about seam ripping. It's just a part of the quilting journey. I have too many quilts that are in my quilt cabinet that I should have seam ripped and I didn't. Nowadays, I realize, take the time. Now look how beautiful that is. Again, with a good clean cuts, good pressing, 1/4 inch seam allowance, being intentional about our seams, and of course we would go ahead and press that open and we would get our final quilt block. I can't even believe we started this last month and we just finished that tutorial. Again, if you haven't jumped into this, we will have the club open for a limited time. You'll be getting your kit from last month and this month. Get that thread set. That is absolutely the thread set to have. We're stitching all of this down, and of course, once you have your project all quilted, all the darling little buttons come into play. There is a touch of hand embroidery on this, a little bit of back stitching here. We have really a French knot, or excuse me, a lazy daisy. We have French knots, a back stitch, and a lazy daisy. I'll go ahead and touch on that. Obviously, I've done a lot of other videos on hand embroidery in more depth, but I'll touch on that really quick. So if you're new to this, you can see how easy that is to do as well. I have some black embroidery floss, Richard Hemming embroidery needle, whatever you love. A back stitch, we're just going to come up, 2 strands of embroidery floss, and you're just going to split the line. You come down a distance, and you go down a distance and come back. I've always thought that's probably why they called it a back stitch. Of course, I don't really know to be sure, but it seems to make sense to me. And go down a distance and come back. You can see this is really easy. One of the simplest embroidery stitches for sure, and you just keep going. Okay. There is a lazy daisy in here. Let's say that this is our stem and we want to kind of come back and maybe add what's almost like a flower or like what's supposed to be a leaf. You're going to come up, trap the embroidery floss, come down where you just came up, and you're creating a loop around your thumb, and you're creating that little teardrop. And then you are dropping the needle down on the other side of that loop. So let me demonstrate that one more time. You're coming up, trap that, go back down. You have your teardrop. Needle comes up, a little bit of a pull, and you go back down. Easy peasy. French knots, another classic. You come up, might be easier if I have it down on the table. Floss goes left, needle is in the front. I don't have a lot of floss here, but I'll try to do best I can. Wrap once and twice. You could do 3 times if you want. Depends on what you're going for. Pivot the needle down and back into the hole where you came up. Trap the thread until you have to let it go to create the knot. I'll do it again. Come up. Again, I'll put it down. It's probably easier for you to see. Floss is to the left, needles in the front. 1, you can move that, that was in the way. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3, or 2, whatever you want. Obviously, the more wraps, the thicker the diameter of that knot will be. And there you go. And then of course, when you get ready to tie off, I just tie off into where I just stitched. Usually there's some fabric here, out an applique of some kind or patchwork that I have a little bit more of, I guess I would call meat to tie off into. Here I don't have a whole lot, but whatever you do, I do recommend that you tie off 2 times. And that's it. And go ahead and clip your thread. So you can see that even though this project looks more complicated than a beginner can handle, it's not. I want to demystify this. We're not building a rocket ship here. This is just a matter of going from one step to the next and following those same practices and disciplines, and you can see you can get some beautiful quilt blocks. So I hope you're enjoying the series. Would love to get your feedback, and if you're not in the club, grab your spot. Limited, as always, your thread set. Any of the notions you saw me use that you think you might need. I look forward to seeing you next month as we continue the On Wander Lane Wall Hanging Club.